Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 20th of May, 2015, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host this afternoon, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike West from Bastion Radio.
Good afternoon, Brian.
Excellent. Mike is also a former ex-serviceman. We're going to be concentrating today on what is happening around the Trident incident, where the young seaman has started to tell some of the secrets of conditions on board at least one of our ballistic nuclear boats. We think this is very important, so that will be a large part. But you're also going to cover CAPITA.
Oh yes, our favourite subjects at the moment, and how this probably interlinks in with a lot of what we're seeing today.
Yeah. So it was Serco, the biggest company you had never heard of. I think that CAPITA is rapidly taking over that role.
Yeah.
And we've got some interesting connections. But of course, what's most important is that the sun is shining in Plymouth, although it's been very cold overnight. You could see your breath this morning. And we've got some pretty good reports of sunshine in Glasgow and sunshine in other parts of UK, although a bit of trouble with the sky, obscured clouds and some aircraft out. Well, where are we going to begin? What better place than taking a look at what the dear old BBC has to say. Just a reminder, this was the ID card for William McNally, and this is the young sailor who is now in custody after his leaks to WikiLeaks about safety on board HMS Victorious, one of the ballistic missile boats. I'm not sure, but I think we might have mentioned Vanguard yesterday, Vanguard class, but his actual boat was Victorious, just in case there's any confusion over that. What sort of submarine are we talking about? Well, we're talking about one of these. This is one of Britain's Trident missile submarines. These are the ones out on patrol to provide Britain's independent nuclear deterrent. Now, we're going to say to our audience today, we're just leaving aside any debate about whether Britain should or should not have a nuclear deterrent. That debate is for another time. We do have a nuclear deterrent. We are looking at what is taking place on board one of those submarines. And we're also going to be looking at how we think the incident is being manipulated for a political purpose. So, Nick, if we can just surface that submarine. Here she is again. Let's have a look at some of the facts about nuclear submarines for people who may not have thought about it in this way. Submarines are inherently very dangerous pieces of equipment. You're talking about 30-odd thousand tons of submarine, in some cases bigger than that worldwide. These are dangerous pieces of kit because of what's essentially in them. So we've got fuel, we've got a variety of chemicals, we've got missile propellants, for example, explosives, nuclear warheads, nuclear reactor, compressed gas, hazards of fire and flood. That's really only just a start. And of course, if we have a look at the UK's track record at the moment, it's been clearly reported that there's been some 44 nuclear submarine fires in the last 5 years. We'll come on to that in a minute. But what does all this mean? Well, it means that nuclear submarines have been lost worldwide as a result of these dangers. The US has lost 2, Scorpion and Thresher. And if we have a look at the Russians, they've lost at least five submarines to accidents on board. Very few crew survived in the majority of cases. So this is the reality of life on board a submarine, and that's a good place to start as we actually have a look at what this young man had to say. Now, where did he push this information out? Well, he used WikiLeaks. So you can have a look. This is part of the text, which includes a photograph of his identity card. And there's a lot of information there. He says he'll jump between things like food hygiene and flooded toilets. It'll also describe the complete lack of security, floods, blazing inferno in the missile compartment. And he said, my aim is to paint an overall picture. He also says that he'd listened in to some of the senior group meetings on board. Now, on this type of boat, you're only allowed to know what your security clearances permit you to know, but it would appear that this young man was listening in on meetings that he had no right to listen into. So a lot of text, which we encourage you to read yourself. But if we sum up the areas that he covered, he said there were great problems with security. Bags were not checked going on board the submarine. Passes were not properly scrutinised as Navy and other personnel came in on board these submarines. He said that highly classified documents were left around. And then he talked about some of the, I'm going to call them the basics. So there were leaks, there were fires, there was a small flood, which I think involved the toilets on board. He said that maintenance regimes were very poor quality or neglected, or the regulations as to how things should be done were ignored. He said that they had, on one occasion at least, problems with the air quality. Of course, on a submarine, the air is a manufactured environment, so it has to be kept very pure. They had problems with people falling asleep, which could be raised CO2 levels or something else, lack of oxygen. He says that there were problems with the nuclear reactor, and he also talks about manning problems, and he also mentions the crash that took place between another one of the ballistic missile submarines, HMS Vanguard, and the French submarine, Le Triomphant. So if we just come back to you, Mike, really.
That's quite a list, isn't it?
Yeah, what's your initial reaction to the sort of thing this young man's talking about?
Well, I was quite horrified when I heard, there's been 44 fires on within 5 years on these submarines. I mean, these are quite enclosed environments, as you could imagine. You would think that the training would be quite tight for something like this, especially now on nuclear-powered submarines as well. The list really doesn't surprise me, because I see, as we're seeing throughout mainly our public services as well, being dumbed down. The same's being happening in the military due to external influences. I mean, we discussed this a lot with the likes of Common Purpose and
cuts, big
cuts as well. Yeah, and this list looks like a typical symptoms list of them cuts.
Yeah.
Not entirely unbelievable, to be honest, because we've seen a steady decline since the late 80s, early 90s, when the military took on a business model.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot to do with this.
Right. Now, your background is RAF, and so you can talk with the confidence of having served in the RAF. I think I'm right in saying that we've seen a similar decline in the operational availability of aircraft as a result of problems with maintenance, the fact that some of the airframes are getting very old, and spare parts an issue. Yeah,
and training issues as well. Everything's budgeted now, and if things aren't kept within budgets, within business units, as they're calling them now, training isn't fulfilled correctly. And the same with repairs, maintenance. It all goes down the same way. It's tragic, really, to see that we're treating a service, an armed service, as a business unit.
Yeah. And a simple analogy for people would be to say that you buy a car. In the beginning, it's a brand new car. You really don't have to do anything with it. Change the oil, check it, but it's going to run quite happily. But when that car's 10 years old, then you're going to start to get problems. You're going to need spare parts, and you're going to need a good mechanic to sort your car out. Then it gets a bit older, and then the electrics and the electronics on the car start to play up. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then it becomes more complicated, because then you need really highly qualified people to get in and look at your engine management system. Well, obviously a nuclear submarine, 100 times more complicated. And one of the things that McNally says, which is very interesting because it rings true with my own experience, he says that basically a lot of pressure on manning on board the submarine, so they were losing people, good people leaving, and he's talking about £50,000 a year a £50,000 bonus being paid to keep people signing on. So these things ring true with me, at least, that the sorts of problems he's talking about, do I think they're real? I absolutely do. I totally agree with you.
I mean, when you hear stories about basic things like sanitation of water tanks on ships and submarines, and if they're not maintained properly, that can bring the whole crew down.
Yeah.
Which it has done, and it's becoming more and more. Well, we're seeing it on not just military ships, we're seeing it on cruise liners as well, where there's an outbreak, and it's due to maintenance. The maintenance isn't being carried out correctly, or they're cutting corners because of budget restrictions.
Right. So ultimately, when we say, well, if there are these problems on board the ballistic boats, where does the fault lie? Well, of course, everybody's going to focus on the Navy and what was actually happening on board that submarine. We say, actually, let's start where the problem really begins, which is the fact that we've had successive governments that say we can continue to cut military budgets, but we're going to keep support at the front line. And this, of course, is a lie, because what the front line doesn't get is proper spares support. It doesn't get proper training.
Yeah.
And, of course, if the boats are spending a huge amount of time on patrol, because there's ever fewer of them, then eventually your qualified people are going to leave. And we know that not only have many highly qualified technicians left,
They've been driven out.
They've been driven out, haven't they?
Yeah. Again, it's the same, I'd say, with junior ranking officers. The quality and maybe the responsibilities they're allowed to have now have been dumbed down. It's a known fact that really high-ranking NTOs really run the show, and even them, they're being dumbed down in their roles now. We started with the red card, yellow card system, when that come in. That was just the start of it, as far as I could see.
Just explain a bit more of that.
Well, how come I'm trying to sum it up? How you could pigeonhole this? It's really about when discipline started to be quelled down a little bit, and they brought in a red card, yellow card system, that if you thought that an NTO was shouting too hard at you or picking on you, you could hold up a red card, yellow card. It didn't last long, I must admit, because it didn't go down too well. But I think that's the start of where our problems is, and because if there isn't that tough discipline regime, especially on board a submarine, I can imagine. I've never been on a submarine myself, but I can imagine if that regime breaks down or just one of the cogs breaks, the whole thing could deteriorate rapidly.
Very quickly, and you make one mistake and you can sink the submarine. So it's dangerous stuff. And of course, the government has bizarrely, or perhaps not, we'll come back onto this, got rid of these critical NCOs. So the people that run the army, or the ships or the submarines in the Navy, or the aircraft for the servicing, they have been pushed out of the military, with David Cameron and his ministers casually saying, well, don't worry, because we're going to recruit new people.
They knew too much.
But of course, those people don't have training. Are we talking fact? Well, let's have a look at the Express here, because the Express really was warning about what was starting to happen, major catastrophe, and it's saying that the nuclear submarine fleet has had 44 fires. It's 4 years. I think I said 5 years, so 44 fires in 4 years. So this is immensely serious stuff, because, of course, a fire in a submarine means that within a few minutes the whole boat is full of smoke. So people need to have breathing apparatus on, or much as an airliner drops down the oxygen masks on board a submarine, you can plug into a line to breathe. Immensely difficult if there's a fire, which is why why a number of nuclear submarines have been lost due to fire. But we're saying that the important thing around this incident is that we start to look deeper. If the British government has deliberately cut funding and has cut manning in the armed forces, is this just to save money, or is there another political agenda? And we're going to say there is another political agenda. So we'll remind you of what we were talking about yesterday. This is an article from the UK column in 2010, when we said there was a supranational plan to disarm Britain. We brought in the banking scam because, of course, we knew that what was going to happen was the excuse of no money was going to be used to absolutely slaughter Britain's armed forces. And in this article, we also flagged up this bizarre incident where HMS Vanguard had collided with a French ballistic missile submarine, and that all took place on the 3rd or 4th of February 2009. Why was this significant? Because it showed us that there was very high level collaboration between the British and French military, and of course this had never been discussed in Parliament. So to put Britain's nuclear deterrent in close proximity with a submarine from another nation, this is quite remarkable. The Americans possibly, but this submarine, Vanguard, was put at risk by being in close proximity.
I'd like to know, Brian, was this part of a training exercise between Britain and France? I don't think it says anywhere in there that there was any specific exercise being carried out here.
Well, of course, the Ministry of Defence remained absolutely silent on this, but I'm going to say from my professional background, for a ballistic missile submarine to be in close proximity to a French ballistic missile system unit was just extraordinary. But of course, what was going on in the background was that we had Gordon Brown starting these talks that there was going to be some form of amalgamation of armed forces between the British and French.
Yeah.
And there were hints that what we were going to see was collaboration on nuclear weapons. Not much in the mainstream press. Well, let's have a look at what the Navy had to say about these reports. And of course, it was essentially to attempt to rubbish and undermine William McNally, and also to say, well, of course, this is not true. So here's the first one. The Royal Navy takes security and nuclear safety extremely seriously, and we are fully investigating both the issues of the unauthorised release of this document and its contents. So the Royal Navy has to answer. It's not just a question that it's not a question that we're getting politicians brought to book, because as we've explained, of course, it's their cuts which have caused many of the problems. So we've got here the Naval Service operates its submarine fleet under the most stringent safety regime, and submarines do not go to sea unless they're completely safe to do so. Now, I was told a couple of years ago that a nuclear submarine didn't go to sea because particularly senior rate engineers on board said this submarine is not safe to go, and ultimately they said we are not going to put the boat to sea. Now, this was never called a mutiny, but what it did indicate to me was that problems on board the nuclear submarines were real. And what were people talking about at that time? They were talking about these draconian cuts, lack of spare parts, lack of timely delivery of spare parts, and of course big problems with manning, not enough men to do the job.
Would this be at the same time that they grounded one in Scotland somewhere, was it?
Well, that of course was the new Astute class, and that was remarkable itself, that we just built a new submarine, and what did we do? It went aground. Now, was that training, or, as I've consistently asked, were there French personnel on board that boat?
Wow.
Well, let's look at the rest of the excuse. Here's the third one. The spokesman also said the Navy completely disagreed with Mr. McNally's report, claiming that it contains a number of subjective and unsubstantiated personal views made by a very junior sailor. Now, I don't think we should let the Navy get away with that entirely, because when I read through the list of what he's talking about, the detail in some of his information says this man obviously saw something.
Yeah.
And if you say there was a fire, there either was a fire or there wasn't. I'm going to say clearly there was a fire, clearly there was a flood, and clearly he's seen lax security.
Well, surely all these incidences are kept in a log.
One would hope so.
You would.
But those won't be disclosed, of course, for national security. Meanwhile, an unnamed spokesman for the Navy simply says, well, what this guy said is untrue. So we do the last paragraph here at the bottom. However, they added that it was right that the contents of the document, his document, were considered in detail. Well, it's more than right. I would have thought it was essential to see what was going on. So if we pause at this point, the story is that we've got effectively a disgruntled sailor who believes that the risk of something bad happening on board a nuclear submarine is so high that he's going to report it to the world. And he said, I don't mind if I go to prison, the safety of the world is more important. But let's have a little look in more detail about what this man had to say.
It's not all it seems.
It's really strange, isn't it? So we've entitled this Politically Motivated, Reframed Language of Able Seaman McNelly. So this is a number of quotes from his own material. I knew I had to get assigned to a boat and go on patrol in order to gather this information. So this implies to me that we're dealing with premeditation.
It sounds like to me, yeah, it doesn't sound like someone who wants to further their career. When you read through this list,
yeah,
it doesn't sound to me like, you know, this guy's gone out of his way to become a submariner. There seems to be some other motive
going
there
on
somewhere. Yeah, go if you carry on with this list. Yeah.
Well, let's follow on through. We'll do a few more and then we'll comment on it. So if you pop that one back, Nick, let's have a look at this one. I needed to create a new persona in order to do this, in order to collect more information. Then this is an amazing statement. We're at war with a new kind of enemy. So this is a very junior, but we're going to say very, I'm going to say he's intelligent and he knows his stuff. But these are sort of political statements. We're at war with a new kind of enemy. Right. The Cold War is over. Well, this is interesting because, of course, David Cameron is more or less telling us it isn't.
It's not, yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's just a matter of time before we're infiltrated by psychopaths or terrorists. Now, the we there is, he's implying the military and the submarine service.
Yeah.
And how about this one? I've been trying to gather information for over a year on the reactor problems. Yeah. So this young man, not only collecting general problems, he was very, very interested in finding out about the nuclear reactors. I had gained enough information to eliminate the biggest threat the UK faces. So according to him, a problem on board one of the ballistic missile systems was a bigger threat than anything else. Well, who put that idea in his head?
Well, this is it. This doesn't sound like whistleblower stuff, doesn't it, really? It sounds more like there's, you know, like you say, it's premeditated for a start, because what was this point that he had to get on board? He had to get onto a submarine. He needed to create a new persona. What, yeah. Into what? To do this? It seems very deceptive. To me, of some of what he's put in his statements here. We're at war with a new kind of enemy. Cold War is over, but this bit gets me. Just a matter of time before we're infiltrated by psychopaths and terrorists. Well, I've got news for him. I think we already have.
Well, this is true, but isn't this is wonderful language for large parts of the government? Let's add the last bit in, because he used all of this cunning to either photograph or video record the entire contents of a classified book. This is CB 8890, Instructions for Safety and Security of Trident II D5 Strategic Weapons System.
Sorry, Brian, just to stop you there, but reading that list there, would that not give you a job description for a spy?
Well, it would. I read it and I thought to myself, this is somebody with political motive. They're on a mission. And then I'm thinking, this is very interesting that this young sailor should be on a mission. And what is he doing? He's revealing very damaging, in the first instance, this is of immense damage to Britain's military defences. But of course, yes, on a question of public safety, this is very important information for public safety. But when you read the calculated way he's gone about it, it's like he's been wound up like the clockwork mouse and put on the job. Well, we're not the only ones that think something's not right, because in the Telegraph, Royal Navy Trident whistleblower faces punishment was a very interesting little part of the article, because it says relatives of A.B. William McNelly say they fear he was persuaded by someone else to publish the dossier. So the family, what were they talking about? Well, they were talking about this, that he was basically changed. I'll come on to that in a bit more. But we also found this in the text. The Telegraph thought it was very important that this young man had also been learning basic Russian.
I think a lot of submariners
or military people
do, especially in communications sections, yes. It's good thing to learn Russian.
Right. So, is there a bit of spin in this article? Let's blame the Russians for the fact that this young man has done what he's done. There's no evidence to support that, but here's the little nudge towards the Russians. But I jumped in a little bit early initially. This was what the article said. His aunt, Lorraine Shearer, said, even when he was home on leave, he was seeing his friends and promoting the Navy. What changed in a few days, really? To change full circle to me doesn't make sense. So relatives and friends are saying there's something weird going on. This was the bit we just highlighted. What changed in a few days? Isn't it remarkable that we're constantly seeing this?
Yeah, it's just remarkable timing as well.
Yeah. Well, this is the timing, isn't it? Because north of the border, we've got a big drive by the SNP to get rid of Trident. So this is part of the BBC's article. And this gentleman we mentioned yesterday, SNP leader Angus Robertson, said a nightmare catalogue of serious safety breaches aboard and alongside these nuclear-armed submarines. So this is just the ammunition that the SNP needs to get nuclear submarines out of Scotland. And if they leave that infrastructure, what ex-military sources tell the UK column is we're never going to get a nuclear submarine base again. So McNally pops up just at the time his information can influence a very big political decision.
As I say, the timing's impeccable, isn't it?
Yeah. So we'll say UK column warning about this stuff time and time again. This is January, February 2009. And what we're saying here is that basically you're seeing Britain's military capability suppressed, destroyed, in order to say to the public, we've got to team up with the French. And our prediction was that British aircraft carriers in the future will be joint manned. So that was us in 2009. And then we just recap very quickly from this yesterday. In our article, we were pointing out that The Guardian, or is it down here, was also saying that there needed to be much more talk about linking up with the French. So if somebody's got it, this young man, so okay, leave it up, Nick, it's there. We just wanted to point out the sort of people that get in to train our military. So Common Purpose, here's their own documentation. We've got Commander Andrew, well, of course, it's the Commodore, so they got this wrong. It's Commodore Andrew Matthews, who's the commander of the naval base. So we've got a senior naval officer, not only being trained by Common Purpose, a political charity, but he sits on their advisory board, and according to Common Purpose, they have secret meetings. So how does this work? Well, what about these two? Just as an example, taken from CP Exposed, we've got a Lieutenant Commander David Wilkinson, a navigator but employed at the HQ in Northwood, London, going back a few years, trained by Common Purpose. And we've got the secretary, command secretary to the Second Sea Lord, also trained by Common Purpose in 2003. So we were exposing years ago that we had some very strange organisations providing training, mental reframing possibly of service personnel. It's
just amazing where this Common Purpose pops up everywhere, doesn't it? And it seems to me wherever this name pops up, there's disaster.
Yes.
There's a breaking down of systems that have worked and have worked for decades. And then all of a sudden, you bring these guys in and everything starts to fall to bits. I'm just surprised really that people don't really know more about this Common Purpose and what they do and what hands they've got in, not just with our military, with our police, with our public services. GCHQ, and it all... Oh, it's just unbelievable what is happening and what is being allowed to happen in front of our very eyes. This is all the proof I need to
ask them questions.
Yeah.
Well, let's just look at this a bit more logically. Here we are. Why is the political charity Common Purpose active in the armed forces? Because Common Purpose conflicts with the Official Secrets Act. There is absolutely no doubt about that.
Definitely.
Let's have a look at some of the stuff. Common Purpose selects people for its courses, so it's having a look at whether it thinks they're suitable, And we know full well that Common Purpose assesses the personality of people to see whether they can be moulded in a common purpose way. So remember, this charity was allowed to penetrate the military, and what is its agenda? To change the way people think. So it's reframing its graduates to break, so I've used the wrong break there, it should be EA, break down silos and national borders.
Yeah.
So here we've got a highly politicised charity that says we want to get people to rethink not about their nation, but a global world. It trains its leaders to act outside authority. Isn't that what this young sailor was doing?
It sounds like very much what he was doing. Yeah.
They operate in secret networks, direct breach of the Official Secrets Act, and it holds meetings between graduates behind closed doors with no minutes, breach of the Official Secrets Act. We've got common purpose staff linked to Marxist-based organisations, breach of the Official Secrets Act, and we've got CP advisory boards have included, for example, paedophiles. And yet we've got, as we have just seen, military personnel sitting on common purpose advisory boards.
Yeah, I'd like to know what sort of
security clearances.
Clearances they get. Yeah, it's just unbelievable that they're allowed to gain this sort of access to personnel that are quite senior, obviously in the military. You know, especially with their techniques, with this NLP technique, using psychological means. Also, our common purpose, they use like Chatham House rules as well, don't they? Where what they do and what they see, they keep secret within their organisation as well. You
can talk the subject, but you don't say who you learnt it from, where the information came from, or when you got that information. Yeah. So that is our challenge to the Royal Navy in particular and the Ministry of Defence. Just who was this young man involved with? We've got the Telegraph lamely trying to hint it was the Russians, and we're going to say, no, we think there was something rather deeper going on, because this young man's testimony could be the final straw that says we've got to completely destroy the nuclear deterrent. Well, Common Purpose isn't the only organisation playing around with people's minds.
By any means.
And we'll say a couple of hours ago, with a little bit of work, we got onto your favourite subject of CAPITA. And what did we find? Well, we found that CAPITA was boasting of thought leadership, reframing people to think in the right way. And when we looked a little bit deeper, we were fascinated to find this man, Rich Gill, is CAPITA Learning and Development Program Manager for Organisational Development and Resourcing. So let's have a look at that in a bit expanded way. He's a national award-winning creative and innovative learning technologist with a proven track record in identifying and implementing successful training programs. Oh, look, we've got somebody else going in for the UK Armed Forces personnel. So this man is trained in, I'm going to say, reframing people in the nicest sense of the word. And who's he playing around with? UK Armed Forces personnel. But he comes from a ginormous company
like this. What is learning technologist? For a start, how would you explain that role?
I think this is scientific and cognitive analysis, so that if you want to change the way people think, you can do it. That's what I think this man is about. We're not saying he's doing anything wrong as per the law. We're simply pointing out with this story who is getting in amongst our armed forces personnel, and how are they actually changing the way they think and act.
Seems to me they're very much bringing in people within the forces that come from corporate structures, and they're trying to reframe the military into being a corporate structure, just as they are our police as well.
I would agree with that. Well, it's really over to you, Mike, because I know you've been doing a lot of work on CAPITA, so just take us through some of these screenshots from their website.
Not only are they wanting to change service personnel's behaviour, they want to change your behaviour as well. And as we see in this screenshot here, this is just one of a multitude of things that CAPITA are getting into, especially within our public services. Being a customer can be anything now from a benefit claimant, from you going to seeking housing, This is the sort of language that they're using now, is that you're a customer. It all sounds friendly. It all sounds, quite civil. But when in fact, the systems that they are using, you go into these centres now, you see signs up everywhere, what you can do, what you can't say, how they assess you if you're going to be aggressive or if you're acting in an aggressive way. But what we are finding now is that you use these public services and there's no human contact at all. Front desks are being closed down. We see this in our councils. You will see this in your courtrooms as well, gradually happening throughout the country, whereby there's a big yellow phone that you pick up, and you pick the phone up, you're expecting to speak to either a member of the council staff or a court staff, and lo and behold, you're talking to a CAPITA person.
Yeah.
So the whole thing's a trick. It's these people that work in the councils and the courts are hiding inside an ivory tower, as it were. And
we've got here, we just changed that screenshot because we're now specifically saying here's CAPITA inside local government.
I don't think people realise just how much CAPITA are involved in every aspect of our lives. So we've grabbed a few screenshots here just to touch on the surface to how much they do. So anything from local government, so that's to do with frontline services for councils in the offices. They're running most of the council's computer systems. They'll know if you're paying your council tax and what band you're in. They know all that data, and if we move on from there, we can see that it's all interlinked.
So we've got debt and legal services here.
Debt, legal services. I've touched on that with the asset grab. Police and justice. As you can see here, this is a CAPITA employed guy taking DNA samples.
It says there on the screen, we've been working the criminal justice sector since the early 1990s.
Yeah, they've been working it all right. Yeah. They've been working our courtrooms, they've been working everything. When you see how they've set up their structures, it wasn't long ago that CAPITA bought out a company called Optima Legal. And the deal there is that they buy up over £30 million worth, £37 million worth of debt to manage as assets. And they got the deal that they bought Optima Legal up for £1 per share.
Right.
Which is not a bad deal. And along with that, they get all the enforcement rights. So there's a lot of conflicts of interest. They're managing debt, they're managing how it's recovered, and they're also managing what goes on in the court, as we found out with the Michael Sinclair case and in Tom Crawford's case.
Yeah.
CAPITA seem to be running the show in the courtrooms as well.
And fingers in all the pies, so no separation of powers. If you deal in CAPITA's world, their octopus goes into the police, into the courts, into...
much further.
Yeah.
I mean, really, we haven't got enough time to go through all this. Right. As I say, I've got a third part coming out on a documentary that we're doing on UK Asset Grab, and we feature CAPITA a lot, purely, simply, is because they own most of the debt industry,
right,
as it were, and enforcement side of it as well.
Well, on that subject, of course, repossession services, another part of Optima. So they're working with the police, they're working with the courts, and then when somebody needs to take, or they feel they need to take your house away, who's going to do it? Well, it's going to be CAPITA, and this is the Optima Legal.
This is the Optima Legal side of things. Yeah. So it's self-perpetuating. We even found out with the Transport for London congestion charge scheme that CAPITA are managing that whole system, from the cameras through to sending out the fixed penalties and then enforcing them as well with their own bailiff companies. There's massive, huge conflicts of interest. People don't realise, because they've set up so many companies, so many different arms to this CAPITA octopus, as we like to call it, that it's very hard to know who you're dealing with. But when you look into it, you're dealing with one company, effectively.
Yeah. And so it goes on. So we've got education here. So they're in the school. What are they doing in the schools?
Well, they're collating data through their systems on behalf of the education system and schools. They know about your child's behaviours. They know about his academic levels. It's just information which really scares me, because they have all these systems. This is called SIMS, by the way, education SIMS. They have all these systems, and it's all this data. I'm interested, what happens with all this data? I mean, if they've got all this data about, they even know on the back system, if you're paid by backs and your wage slips, they manage all that. They know what you're being paid, they know what you're paying out, they know if your vehicle's taxed, they know if you've got your TV licence, they know what your kid's doing at school, They know what's in your bank account. They know you're shopping. They know absolutely everything about you. And my concern is how are they using all this data?
Yeah.
It's, you know, that you can't tell me that they're isolating all this data and they don't know what's really going on, you know, with us all.
What's going on with us all, and who is actually assessing it? So you mentioned utilities, I think, and here's the utility one. It's normal routine. The evidence is right in front of us.
It's the same computing systems they use throughout, no matter who your energy provider is. They even know about your energy usage and whether you're paying your bills on time. It really is big. I thought monopolies in this country were illegal. Well, CAPITA has got one huge monopoly on us.
And that is even going to be here in your housing, total housing solutions.
Yeah, well, a lot of housing associations are having to use CAPITA's systems. I think it's about 65-70% of local authorities in this country use CAPITA or Liberator as their administrational team. With housing, it's the same thing. Housing associations have to pay hundreds of thousands of pounds a year to use CAPITA back office IT systems. And that's purely because the council stipulate, well, you must use the CAPITA system. So there's no choice. They have to use it.
And that must come into play because there's a central government policy to be saying to local authorities, this is what you must use in procurement.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, well...
Who's feeding who?
Who's feeding who? What are the last ones we got here? Well, back to Optima again, vehicle and third-party recoveries.
Seeing that CAPITA run most of the fixed penalty systems throughout this country and are linked in with the ANPR cameras and the managing of that, it's quite convenient to have your own vehicle and third-party recovery network as well. Like I say, it's a self-perpetuation machine, CAPITA, and it's doing quite well out of everyone else's misery. Yeah.
And lastly, well, we shouldn't be surprised. Sorry, this one's a little bit on the small side. Services to the healthcare industry. So CAPITA must be burying its way into the NHS too.
It's quite clear there, isn't it? It says whether you're an NHS commissioner, a provider serving your local community, or a company with a workforce to nurture. These are in every spectrum of our healthcare service, very high up in the NHS. And not only that, you know, the links in with the private suppliers to the NHS as well. So it's they're in every aspect of our life. So this really does scare me, actually, that a company can have this much influence and power within every aspect of our lives, to be honest.
Yeah, including the armed forces.
And the armed forces, which is even more scary.
Well, we'll just end by going back to the whistleblower, William McNally, from the ballistic missile submarine HMS Victorious. We just read you the end of one of the statements he made. He says, nuclear weapons have served their purpose in human history. From the beginning of civilization, humans have evolved from small families to clans, then to villages, then to towns, then nations, then empires. These empires were mainly created through war. Nuclear weapons brought a new form of order to the world. Order was no longer created by the wars of empires. It was created by fear alone. However, this world is evolving, and in order to survive, we must adapt. The world faces a new threat. Order through the fear of nuclear annihilation can no longer be maintained. Every major nation on the planet has been infiltrated by terrorists that are preparing to attack us from within. Our nuclear weapon systems are the prime target, and we are wide open to attack. We must unite globally in order to eliminate the biggest threat the world has ever seen.
I'm sorry, Brian, but you know, for a whistleblower, I think, you know, getting a little bit of a sermon at the end of it as well. Yeah. Doesn't add up to me. This is not typical whistleblower treatment. If you look at the likes of whistleblowers, let's take Nicholas Wilson and HSBC.
This is a change
Definitely.
agent.
It's the language being used that gets me. I mean, you take Nicholas Wilson when he came out with the HSBC stuff. We didn't get lectures from him. He just come out with the facts. This is what I saw. You know, this is what the risks are. This is how much money they've taken from people. This is like a bit of a lecture at the end of it as well.
So the short term, the timing absolutely perfect to give SNP the ammunition they need to say, we want Trident out of Scotland, it's dangerous, this young man tells us. What an amazing coincidence. And on the bigger picture, of course, We have consistently said the plan is that Britain is to be stripped of nuclear weapons. They're to be held by the French. And that locks Britain into the EU. And the third part of it, of course, is it is the United Nations that says, well, actually, in the future, the only people that are going to hold military power, or the only organisation, will be the UN itself.
Yeah.
So remarkable statements by this young man. Do we believe that President Putin's agents were training him? I'm afraid to say we don't. What we believe is going on is this is to do with change agent training. Could have been common purpose, possibly, but there are a number of other organisations.
Munch 23 says it's not quite Snowden. I agree.
Not quite Snowden.
No.
Well, there you are. That brings us to the end of quite a detailed look at that one part of the UK news. We think it deserved the treatment because it's such an important scam. There we are. I've used the word. But thanks very much for joining us. Mike, thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Just remember, Mike will be producing a lot more detail about the CAPITA octopus in due course. And don't forget, we are in an information war. This is what it's really about.
Yeah.
If we can get enough of the truth out, then we can simply bring down this corrupt, paedophilic government, which is clearly lying by the day. There we are.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us. We'll be back same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye.